Again. Hello, and welcome back to the Wayland Weekly Buzz. I'm your host, Susan Wagner. My guests this week are Select Person Cherry Carlson and Town Moderator Dennis Berry. We're going to discuss the status of annual town meeting. Now that it's been postponed because of COVID-19, will it be held this year? If so, when and where? Why has it taken so long to decide, and what are the conditions that would ensure public safety? Let's start with where we stand today regarding annual town meeting. And let's begin with the fact that it's been postponed. So Dennis, as town moderator, you initially postponed ATM to May 29th and now to the end of June. And you'll repeat that in 30-day increments as long as there is a state of emergency. Can you explain that? Why not just extend one time, say till September?
A couple of things. So first, I extended it, and we were originally supposed to have it on April 5th. That was more or less the height of the pandemic. I extended that under Chapter 39, Section 10A of the general laws. It's newly adopted, and a new provision in there allowed moderators to extend with consultation with the selectmen, public health, public safety, to extend for 30 days. I extended to the end of April. I did it again for the end of May, and I just fairly recently did it for the end of June. And I'm only allowed 30 days, and then it's only under a public health emergency. Now that's a little different than a state of emergency. Let's keep the two terms separate. And let's see what happens in July. Whether I will extend it to the end of July and again the end of August. We'll just have to see what the conditions are at that time. Just to continue for 1 second about the state of emergency, I can do that under a public health emergency. That's the words of the statute, but I can only do it for a period of 30 days after the rescission of a state of emergency. That's declared by the governor.
Susan, I completely agree with what Dennis has said, and we've had many conversations, so it's been really a great sharing of information. But just to your one specific question, Dennis didn't have the right to just extend all the way to September. So it is an iterative process, which is good because it makes us have the conversation and reassess with every 30 days.
Every 30 days, right. So it looks as if at this point you're going to be extending to the end of July, and then the end of August, and then the end of September. We'll probably reassess in September.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, you have the math right? You have the math right, Susan, but neither the Board of Selectmen nor the Board of Selectmen with Dennis as moderator have had that discussion.
Okay.
And I think we need to take a look together at where we are each time. And as we get to some of your other questions and thoughts, we also have to keep in mind what the lead time is to actually call a town meeting. Right. So I do think that we'll have some information, and I think we're all hopeful that we won't keep postponing, forever. We'll be able to make some decisions, and there's lots of good guidance now, both from the moderators and from other towns. So.
Yeah. Could you once again, Dennis, explain what's the difference between a state of emergency and a public health emergency? I think you said the state of emergency is declared by the governor and the public health emergency is declared by the Board of Health.
Public health emergency is the phrase I use because it's right out of this Section 10A, Chapter 39. 10A was originally written for the situation of a snowstorm or where the building burned down. And actually, one of the impetus for the statute was that the moderator, in the case of a terrible snowstorm, in the past, prior to this, the moderator and clerk would have to go to the locale and declare a state of emergency, and something. This means let's say there's the worst snowstorm going in the 1978 snowstorm. Those of us remember it is going on. I could declare a state of emergency and continue for 30 days, sitting in my living room.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But now they've added. This year it was added a public health emergency.
And that's declared by our Board of Health?
No, that's actually declared by probably me. and I've determined there's a public health emergency. Now, I've got to do it in consultation with the Board of Selectmen, public safety, and public health officials. I just can't off the top of my head. But it's a public health emergency. That's different than a state of emergency, which is declared by the governor, and which right now we are in a state of emergency. We're all familiar with where phase 1 and phase 2 and so forth. That's all because there's a continuing state of emergency. If the governor on June 30th says the state of emergency is over, everything's good and neat again, we would have to have a town meeting by probably July 31, 30 days.
But I do want to say, it's not going to, right, that's not, the likelihood of that happening is very low. I was on a webinar this week with there are about 300 to 400 Massachusetts officials on it, where KP Law, who is our town council, spoke about this. And that actual question came up is, if you're postponing things, what's the likelihood that the state of emergency will be lifted? And there is great agreement that that's not going to happen anytime soon. And part of that is financial, because as we continue to incur costs right now under a state of emergency, they can potentially be reimbursed. So we're going to be, there's no good incentive to lift the state of emergency. We may loosen things within it, but from the governor's perspective, I think it's here for a while, at least for the duration until we decide on a town meeting date.
Sherry, I'm glad I'm not you. Positions and responsibilities. No, too many things to consider. Well, the Mass legislature has passed legislation about holding town meetings. Maybe we've been over this, but what does the legislation provide?
Sure. Dennis, why don't I start and please jump in, because I think
there is the question whether it's been passed yet.
It has. It was passed late last week. So originally, there was legislation passed earlier that allowed town meeting to happen after June 30. And then it was just confirmed late last week. I got updates over the weekend on it. So it does allow town meeting to happen after June 30. It does allow now for the selectmen under very strict protocol to vote for a reduced quorum. It does allow for town meeting to be held outside of your geographic community. So we could now hold it outside of Wayland if we needed to for a location reason. And as part of that same legislation, it does also say that if you do postpone your town meeting beyond June 30, that the mechanism to fund your budget is now in place with what we refer to as the 1/12 budgets. So all of those components may have been in different legislation, but those parts have all passed. What also passed was if you have a representative town meeting, you can now have a virtual town meeting, which is a whole nother discussion, but that does not apply to Wayland.
Okay. Dennis, do you have anything to say here?
No, that was, there's been some question. What I was referring to is, I've been following, the moderator's been following some of that legislation, and there was a provision in some of the, but I don't think passed last week, and I'm not sure where it is right now. In fact, I was on the phone call with legislators just yesterday.
Yeah, there were components, Dennis, that we've talked about in public meetings, like limiting the warrant or other things that were not included in what passed last week.
That's what I was trying to find out why.
Yeah.
That's a little
Okay, well, you mentioned representative town meeting, and some people may not know the difference between that and an open town meeting, which is what we have. So could you explain that? What's the difference?
Could write a book about that.
Yeah.
Open town meeting, which I love, and is in Wayland, means any registered voter, the set time and date, the time, date, and place is set by the selectmen, the warrant is set by the selectmen, the order of articles set by the selectmen. Any registered voter can come in, speak within the time limits, and vote. Representative town meeting, there's your elected representative. For example, if we had 100 representatives in Wayland, we would elect 25 from each of our 4 precincts, and only those 100 people could vote. Most representative meetings allow non-representatives to speak, but they can't vote. And the big difference here is that with the virtual town meeting, therefore, they only have 100 or 150 people who actually can vote and are actually on the virtual town meeting. Whereas we couldn't do that for an open town meeting.
Right.
Because to me, one of the glories of open town meeting is someone who's never been involved before, as a registered voter, can come in, speak, and vote.
Right.
Yeah.
So we did, Susan, we did get to hear, for instance, Lexington has a representative town meeting, and they held a virtual one and have provided guidance for others. But to Dennis's point, I think they have 190 to 200 representatives that they're dealing with.
The next question, how big? Yeah.
Yeah.
How big?
Needham is also representative. They actually held their town meeting last night. I don't know if they finished, but again, they did theirs outside as opposed to virtual. So we are seeing, even in those representative town meetings, they're handling it different ways.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
we just don't get any of those leeways. We need to plan for, an attendance. I mean, who knows exactly what it will be, but for attendance, not being able to turn anyone away, and for the ability to debate and discuss those articles that will be on the warrant for that meeting.
Okay. Well, we'll get to the warrant in a minute. I noticed driving around yesterday that Lincoln is scheduled to hold their open town meeting in a parking lot. What kind of consideration did we give to an outdoor venue, and what are the pros and cons, and how did that sort of turn out?
I know I've given, I'm sure Cherry has also.
Yeah.
We looked at the outdoor town meeting. Now, first thing I need to look at, many towns, Lincoln is a good example, they will complete their town meeting in a matter of hours.
Right.
Many towns complete their town meeting in one night. That's the way they do it. That's their tradition. Wayland, when's the last time we had a one session town meeting? I think it was 2007. And you laugh. And so that is a consideration. And then we also looked at having an outdoor town meeting, but about the only thing it does, given that we're going to have 2 or 3 sessions, because that's our tradition, is once you're seated, you still have the same parking, the same registration, the same voting, the same coming up to the microphone, all the other things. So for a multi-session town meeting, I don't think really is helped by an outdoor. After all, the thing, could we do it? Yes. Other towns are doing it? Yes. But I don't think for us.
So I think there are a couple of things to think about there, Susan. Most of these other towns use a consent calendar, and that's something that Wayland hasn't chosen to do. In fact, I think it's been voted down at a previous meeting. But that's a case where they are allowed to group many articles into one vote. We get close to that with our abbreviated presentation procedure, but we still need to address each article. So that is one tool that communities have been using to help with town meeting this year, is really moving as many articles to consent as they can. The other thing I wanted to say is we still will consider an outdoor town meeting. So this postponement that Dennis has done in consultation with everyone has really been because we don't feel that we can run a safe town meeting right now from a health perspective, given how we like to participate in town meeting. So this gets to the heart of what Dennis was saying. We are used to having attendance. We are used to having time to speak. And the protocols around arrival, check-in, seating, speaking at a microphone, the need to clean surfaces in between speakers and usage, voting, and if you're outside, can we use electronic, can we not? There are a lot of questions that we haven't pursued yet because we just weren't there on the general protocols around holding a town meeting for Wayland. I do think, and I would hope that when we hold annual town meeting, that and this is me, this is not speaking for the board, but there are ways to limit the warrant. We can certainly work with each article sponsor and ask them to consider not rising. So when the moderator asks if there's a motion under Article X, if no one rises, we don't even have to take a vote to pass over. Dennis could move on to the next article. But that takes some coordination and some planning ahead of time and discussion with the public. And that's all very important to do. But I think if we can, through agreement, limit the topics that are on the town meeting, I would hope that maybe this one time we could do annual town meeting in one session to get done only what we need to do.
And what are those items that we
Terry
definitely?
raises a good point, though. Like it is the selectmen who decide the location. The selectmen decide date, place, location. I mean, they have more resources than I do. I mean, I've gotten involved naturally because of interest, but on the other hand, the final call, indoor, outdoor, is the selectmen's.
Right, and even though Dennis is very nice and says it ends up there, I mean, Susan, as you know, it happens with the moderator, it happens with our public safety officials, with our facilities. We'll use the Elvis group because they've got great records and ways of surveying, and we'll talk with the Board of Health. So there are many inputs. It's just the final decision with those inputs, and public input is with the Board of Selectmen. Once we decide, then it is, everybody rowing in the same direction to make it work and work well.
Okay, so for everybody's information, the Elvis Committee is the electronic voting.
Thank you.
Electronic Voting Implementation Subcommittee.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm a little distracted right now. If Cherry or Dennis, if we do go to a limited warrant, what are the items that would definitely be included that need to be done at the next town meeting?
So, Susan, we haven't talked about that with any depth. So again, I just want to be clear. This would just be my, quick take on it. I think we would be looking at primarily passing a fiscal year 21 budget with any of the financial articles that support that. Plus maybe the CPA set aside and transfer, because that funds our debt payment for the Mainstone loan. And I think we would just have to look at, originally the warrant had 31 articles, and I think we would have to go through, I would hope it would be less than half that maybe, but I have not gone through, nor has the board, one by one. I think the one that if we were able to do town meeting earlier, we would have had that same approach. And I think the only business article that we wanted to bring forward was funding the local roof. And the project has become no less needed, but we've missed the time frame now for a vote, a bid, and getting the work done before school potentially opens in September. And this is work that can't be done with the kids in the schools.
I see. Okay. And so meantime, we're working on this 1/12 budget.
Yes.
Can you just briefly explain what that is?
Sure. Yep.
Sigh of relief.
Right. So we're still going to operate. It's good. So actually at our last meeting on June 5th, the board voted 3 1/12 budgets. So we voted one for July, one for August, and one for September. And they're really very simple, Susan. They only have 4 line items in them. And so there's a municipal line item, which includes all of the town budgets and all of the unclassified. There's a school line item. And then for our 2 enterprise funds, water and wastewater, we also needed to vote a line item for them. And the mechanism is you use your fiscal year 20 budget as your base. So that's last year's budget as your base. And you don't just simply take 1/12, but so for instance, many municipalities, Wayland included, we pay all of our pension in July. So we pay up front in order to get a payment discount. So that lump sum payment is allowed to be added to our July 1/12 budget. If we have a debt payment that happens in that month, we're allowed to add that. So it's basically 1/12 of our general operating plus any one-time expenses that occur in that month. So to give you an example, the July budget that we voted in total is just under 11 million. It's 10,900,000. But the August one dips down to 4,000,004. And that's just because there's so many one-time payments that occur in July.
Okay. So how would you go about informing every voter in town once the new plans are established?
We're going to ask everybody that we know to help communicate. I will say, just as 2 points of reference, in our packet on May 27th, so in the Board of Selectmen packet on May 27th, is a 30-page document that Dennis provided us from the Massachusetts Moderators Association.
We posted that on our website.
Perfect. And 30 pages sounds like a lot, but it's very well done. It's in table format, and it walks through so many considerations, as well as some of the communication tools. And the other thing that will be in the Board of Selectmen's packet for our meeting tomorrow is the materials that were provided by KP Law and the MMA, being the Mass Municipal Association, for this webinar last week. And those also provide many checklists and things to consider before town meeting, during town meeting, and after town meeting. So communication is key in all of those. And we're going to need not only, I think, actually, Susan, communicating the date, the time, and the place of town meeting is sort of the easy thing. Then we need to think about how best to communicate what is the people flow at town meeting. What are the procedures? What are the safety and health procedures? Our ADA compliance, where you park, how you walk in, how we're going to speak. I think other towns have videotaped walkthroughs and posted them. They've done things like the warrant hearing to do talk-throughs of articles and how votes will go. Dennis,
let me add to that, Cherry. I am starting to collect as town meetings happen. Lincoln's happening this week.
Yeah.
Maynard, the other towns, moderators, a lot of moderators are posting their protocols up there. I will be sharing these with you.
Good.
I'll sort of compile them and send them on rather than sending one at a time. I just recently got one from the moderator in Andover, very complete.
Yeah.
And I'll be putting that together and so that you have a picture of all this.
Perfect. And I think, Susan, this is an excellent case of there's no need for us to recreate the wheel here. If we can learn from and use other protocols, we should.
Good. Well, still, it's going to be a lot of work. Will we be compiling and publishing a new warrant, do you think?
I don't believe so. They were mailed to everyone's household. We have spoken a couple of times asking people to hold on to them. Okay. It is available online. Okay. We have a small number for town meeting itself, as we always do. So legally, it would be the same warrant, Susan, whether, we're in a situation of needing to reprint. I just haven't considered that. I do go back to, though, when we pick a date, we need 6 to 8 weeks lead time to do all this communicating and reposting and communication and the facilities aspects.
Okay. Well, we are actually taping this on June 9th, which is Election Day in Wayland. And so the last question I have is, when will our new slate of officers take office with ATM being postponed?
So our bylaw, we passed this at 2009 annual town meeting. Our bylaw states that elected officials take office at the conclusion of annual town meeting. And I believe it was a petitioner's article when it was brought, but the thought was that for those articles that were prepared for town meeting, you'd still have officials in place who had worked on them and had the information. That was passed by the state legislature in March of 2010. So it is, I can't remember now if it's a special act but it's, it was passed at the state level. So right now that's our governing mechanism. I did have a question whether there was anything underway at the state level to waive that. I have not heard about that, but we will, need to address that going forward. I do know in this interim period, just from my experience in the past, boards have always welcomed into the conversation the member-elect, but I just don't know how that will actually legally be handled. We've never had something like this. We've never had this kind of duration.
Great. Well, thank you. Is there anything either of you would like to add before we say goodbye?
I have a couple of points I'd like to finish up with. First, I I'm signing these 30-day declarations, and there is a matter of integrity here. If I don't find there's a public health emergency, I won't be able to sign that. And then we would have to have a meeting within 30 days.
Right.
I hope that, no, let's just say, I hope that happens. And I hope the public safety emergency goes away. Let's hope this pandemic, COVID-19, is forgotten about in two weeks. Also, it's not going to happen. Also, one of the considerations I can't take into account is someone said, well, gee, in July and August, everybody goes away. Well, I can't, that's not a public health emergency. And so if it so happens that the public health emergency ends,
Yeah.
the fact that everybody's away is not a consideration. Final point I want to make, whenever we have town meeting, we will have a reasonable level of precaution. It will not be perfect. There will be those who find that whatever we do, check-in, wiping, masks, whatever, is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We can't be perfect. We'll work with the Board of Health. We'll work with, I'm sure the selectmen will.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a reasonable level of precaution.
Okay. Sharon, anything else?
I would just say, I agree with what Dennis said. I would say we, as the board, have talked about 2 key goals around town meeting. Being able to hold one that is as safe as we can make it. So I completely agree with Dennis on that. We will try hard. We want to have as many people attend as can. We don't want people to be disenfranchised either because of requests to stay at home because of age or health concerns, not being able to have childcare. But our second goal is really to preserve the deliberative process that is Wayland Town Meeting. And we want it to be valid. It will be different, but we want it to be valid.
Okay. Well, thank you both. We'll be following this story throughout the next few months, and we wish you luck in making your decisions. We will support you in whatever decisions you decide to make. And so thank you.
We will get there. We will get there.
We will have a meeting.
All right. Maybe that should be the title of the show. We will get there. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye-bye.